Locho sambo pagyu trashi pa tuche tembe trinle yarngo da pelge drolor tsambe tse parache palden lame shabla solwa de Oma Guru Vajradara Sumati Munisha Sane Karm Utta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Oma Guru Vajradara Sumati Munisha Sane Karm Utta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Oma Guru Vajradara Sumati Munisha Sane Karm Utta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Oma Guru Vajradara Sumati Munisha Sane Karm Utta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Oma Guru Vajradara Sumati Munisha Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Pakyuke Kudan Dagilu Pakyuke Sungdan Dagi Nga Pakyuke Tudan Dagi Yerme Chiktu Chingi Olo Makyuke Kudan Dagilu Makyuke Sungdan Dagi Nga Makyuke Tukdan Dagi Yerme Chiktu Chingi Olo Om Muni Muni Mahamuni Shakya Muni Soha Om Muni Muni Mahamuni Shakya Muni Swaha Om Muni Muni Hamuni Shakya Muni Swaha Sashipu ki choshi meto Tamare Rabalingashi Nide Gyampadi Sange Shintu Mikte Ulwarki Drokunanam Dashingla Chöpar Shoyidam Guru Ratna Mindrala Kamniryatayami Sangye Chedan Sogi Chonam La Chancho Pardo Dani Kyapsu Chi Dagi Chishe Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Pinchra Sangye Drupar Sho Sangye Chedan Sogi Chonam La Kyapsu Chi Dagi Jinso Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Pinchra Sangye Drupar Sho Sangye Chedan Sogi Chonam La Chancho Pardo Dani Kyapsu Chi dagi chishe gibe sonam ki drola pinchira sange druparasho.
In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment. With the practice of generosity and the other perfections, may I obtain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings.
In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment. Through the practice of generosity and the other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Namo Yalhaye Keda Ludan Jinke Drubundandami Kenamdan Drowakunge Dranam Chitsampa Tamche Ketu Dagi Cheten.
Good morning. Today I wanted to begin by talking about the strength of habits. For example, when we do something a few times, depending on what it is, it becomes quickly a habit. But I wanted to begin with, by doing a collective, courageous action. I didn't think that we were gonna that I were gonna do this, but since I heard this ding, I I want to tell you, those of you who have a cell phone here, please take your cell phone, keep the cell phone in your hand, and do something courageous. Turn it off completely. Take, just push. It's a little bit difficult, but move your finger, just those two side buttons, press that button as long as it takes to turn it off. Don't put it in airplane mode. Don't turn the sound off. Don't turn it off completely, because the next phone that rings, I'm going to have that person come here, and then the next time it happens, it's going straight to the lake. No, it's not because it's making noise. It's not that it's ringing. It's because when we have our cell phone with us, there's an invisible string that's connecting our attention to that object. There's a part of our thought, of our attention, of our energy, our presence that is not with us but is there. We're here, but a part of ourselves, maybe we're waiting for someone to say something, or maybe there's some little notification. Oh, how wonderful. We're there waiting. It reminds me, I remember at the beginning of cell phones in China, they had something quite particular. So having a cell phone without receiving calls was a bad sign. It meant that nobody loved you, that you weren't important. So there was a service that you paid, and they would call you in that time frame, and somebody would talk to you as if it were something important. So if you go have a meeting and then the phone call comes and you're there, oh, you need to take that call. But the point is, in reality, we are very, very simple beings. We want to complicate ourselves, but we are very simple beings, and we we have our own dynamics of survival, actually, that we have developed them over the millions of years. And we're we are very attentive to novelty. When there's something different, it wakes us up. We have a dynamic, things that we need generate a feeling of pleasure, and when that pleasure ends, we want to go back to that. It's like dopamine for us that generates on the other side what's called, I can never remember this name. The, our system of reward. I mean, why do I work hard for food? Because I don't want to be hungry and it's pleasurable to eat. That's why I'm ready to work hard for food. But all these mechanisms that we already have from the get-go, at a certain point, it happens that when we use them in a wrong way or we exaggerate with them, then work against us. And this object, what it's generated in our lives, other than a deep addiction, and any form of addiction generates weakness, emotional, mental weakness, physical weakness, regardless of what the addiction is. So in addition to generating addiction, you know, there are these moments of abstinence. You don't feel sure, secure if you don't have it when you leave your house, etc. But when we talk about meditation, it becomes really complicated today, more and more difficult to create ideal conditions to develop a deeper state of awareness and concentration. Why? Because we are constantly going in the opposite direction. Yesterday, when we talked about the Dhyani Bhuttas, at a certain point, if I remember well, I explained the relationship between with satisfaction and concentration. I think it was yesterday. Yes. Anyway, what happens is the following. To have have the mind rested on an object and be present in the present moment and what we're doing, and have that calm, that state of concentration, which is fundamental along our path. There are mostly two enemies to meditation, to concentration: Xinhua and Gupa. Translated as Xinhua is translated as mental torpor, foggy-mindedness, and Gupa is mental agitation, excitement. Did you turn it off? Marco, did you turn off your phone? Thank you. Either we're here to just play, or we're here really to learn. One doesn't realize, but maybe you don't realize, I don't know why, but when there are moments for teaching, anything that happens, I see every detail. I pretend that I don't, but actually, even when someone makes a grimace, they didn't really understand something or whatever it is, and when the more our attention is collective and acute, then the better it is for everyone. So mental agitation, this so-called gupa in Tibetan, is one of the main enemies to our meditative concentration, men- mental torpor, the foggy mindedness, it comes after. I mean, it's also an interference, but the main one is mental excitement. So here we are, we're present, we try to meditate, and we're not able because our mind goes here and it goes there. We try to be here, but there's an inner sense of worry. Mental torpor instead, there's not a anxiety, but one feels sleepy. The mind is not clear mind, you're not clear minded. Oh, instead of, okay, maybe I'm trying to follow my breath or I'm trying to make the visualization, but I'm half asleep. This is called mental torpor, mental foggy mindedness. So what happens is, to meditate well, the first thing that is said in all texts that I've been able to read, like the Lamrim of Lama Tsongkhapa, first of all, we need to create favorable conditions to diminish this type of attraction, this type of mental agitation. And one way to do this is to move away from objects of distraction as much as possible. What's important to understand, it was important for me to understand it, when we talk about this mental agitation, this so-called gupa, it's said that mental agitation it's a derivative of desire and attachment. It's part of attachment and desire. I am quite convinced that this is the state that we feel after a shot of dopamine. Because when we feel pleasure, for example, we see something pleasurable, we eat something pleasurable, anything pleasurable, when that moment of pleasure ends, do we stay in that blissful state? Oh, how beautiful! No, that that long tail of well-being, or after that pleasure, when it ends, do we feel a void and a need to repeat it? What is our normal experience about it? It's more like this void, this emptiness. This emptiness, the stronger it is, so the stronger the experience of pleasure is. In other words, the the higher the level of dopamine is, the greater the deeper that void is, and the greater the need to fill that void is. That feeling of emptiness and the desire to fill that void, that takes the person into a deep state of non-peace. I need to do something to fill up this hole. I think we've all experienced this. And then when that increases, it becomes anxiety. And this is the basis of mental excitement. So this constant dynamic that we have of a lifestyle that is highly, if I can use the term, dopaminic, where we're constantly doing things to experience pleasure, to constantly trying to fill gaps, fill holes. Because when we have that feeling of void, what do we need immediately to fill that void? Dopamine. It doesn't matter what object it is that brings that shot of dopamine. What we want is dopamine like a drug. Someone who is strongly addicted to a substance, regardless what it is, maybe goes into abstinence. So it's not the pleasure of the substance itself, it's the need to eliminate that void, that lacking. I don't know if that's clear. So, for example, small children, I've talked about this many times, but we need to get back to this point. Otherwise, we're really going to be trapped. So, what helps children focus? Silence. If a child is bored and we need to get his attention to help that child, do we say, no, everybody quiet? No, no, we need sound, colors, or black and white, or movement, or we stay seated still. There are four things: sound, color, movement, and novelty. These things actually generate dopamine. When we enter into contact with movement, sound, color, and novelty, that generates dopamine within us. Wanting it or not, being aware of it or not, child or an elderly person, it generates dopamine within. So when we have that void inside, actually what we want is just to fill that hole. And if we have a way to do that that is very accessible, easy, or not at all tiresome, or another that is more tiresome and takes more effort, which one are we going to choose? We're going to take the easy one, naturally. The problem is that every time we fill that gap with something immediate and easy, more and more, we have somehow that that emptiness, um, um, that emptiness um, comes more and more often. On the other side, there's another important hormone, which is serotonin. Serotonin is connected to what mental state? Satisfaction, fullness. Chemically speaking, from what I've understood, I am not the best person to talk about this. We have our great friend, Dr. Rohir, who could explain this all better. But what happens is the more we experience dopamine, the less we generate serotonin. We produce serotonin. This is something natural that's happening. So what happens is, why am I using the example of the cell phone? Because if we want to meditate well, we need to diminish our addiction to dopamine. Otherwise, we sit down, inhale, exhale, and then we can't manage anymore. We want to get out. We want to go do something to stop that feeling of emptiness or anxiety. The problem with the cell phone is that it's an object that is a dopamine factory that 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 we have just in the palm of our hands. I mean, how often do you take your phone in your hand without having to do anything special? Not because I need to call someone, or I need to write an email, or I need to research something. No, I pick it up. I'm doing something because I have attraction to that object in that moment, because I feel a little empty, I feel bored, and I just pick up the phone. I mean, how often does that happen to you? Very often. Yesterday at lunch, there was a child who, you know, was in a state of anxiety, and then took the tablet and the phone and then was calm. And we're not that much different. I mean, what's the deeper problem here? Relating to meditation, the more addicted we are to this dynamic, the less we'll be able to meditate. We'll try to sit down to meditate, and the mind's wants this, it wants something else, and that generates anxiety, actually. That's the basis of mental agitation. So we need to free ourselves from this dynamic. Be present in where we are. Slow down. When I said before to turn off the phone, a little bit joking, but not really joking, not because it's bothersome if there's a mm, sometimes there's a ringtone here and there. Sometimes it's even fun to hear other people's ringtones. That's not the point. But this moment now will never repeat itself again, and we're doing something important. And that object there's a to some degree doesn't allow us to be here. Maybe someone says, no, I relate to my phone differently. That's not true. It's not true because there's a certain dynamic in all of us. It's how we're made on how we're cabled, how we're wired. Sorry, how we're wired. It's part of our structure. I see that in all cultures. The monasteries in Tibet, at Tashilhunpa, one of the most sacred places, one of the amazing monastery, they have a frightening level of frightening number of uh, a frightening level of addiction related to cell phones is incredible. Also in India, that the level of study and practice has degenerated tremendously. I said, why? Because of knowledge, because of practice. Studies, it has worsened because between a lesson and another, between a debate session and another, between a puja and another, there's the cell phone in between. And when I sit down to meditate, where's my mind? There. A part is still attracted to what it's seen. But what it's attracted to, unfortunately, is not the content of what I was looking at. It's attracted to this chemical addiction. And one of the most worrying things, and I personally worry about this a lot, and it doesn't have to do just with me, it has to do with all of us. When I worry a lot, because together, as I said before, together with dopamine, we have this system of reward. It's the fact that I experience something pleasurable. Oh, wow, wonderful. Dopamine finishes, there's the emptiness, and that gives me the energy to work hard to get that pleasure back. So it's fundamental to get us busy to doing something. But once we can fill the void without any kind of effort, and it's always more and it's easier and easier and more accessible, we lose our ability to work hard and we become weaker and weaker. The first difficulty that we encounter, we're not able to face it. We want everything more immediate. We're not able to set high objectives out of fear and insecurity. It's very diffused. It's what we were talking about before. If I have a feeling, uh, and I can resolve that with something that is close by or something that's far away, we have this strange idea that if I'm able, we have this idea that the 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 less I work hard, the happier I'll be. But that's such just a trap of a way of thinking. But this system of reward is fundamental. It's our ability to look beyond, to have of a higher objective and allow ourselves to face difficulties without losing the joy of walking in that direction. But the more we live in this addiction to dopamine with short-term rewards, the 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 more we lose our ability to work hard to achieve something, to set higher objectives. And one of the first steps to change this dynamic within ourselves is to take away the object of addiction. Because someone who has an alcohol addiction, or someone who's addicted to chocolate, someone is addicted to cocaine, whatever it is, to think of the other substance you want, how can you help someone, or how can that person get out of that addiction if every day that substance is given to them in their hand? It's 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 dark. So one of the first things we need to do is diminish the contact with things that are not good for us. And when I said jokingly, but not really, let's be courageous, this act of courage, turn off your phone. Uh, Symbolically, it's an act of courage, but actually on a practical level too, because that's our that is our dopamine source. So how can I be without it? So I invite you really, if you're interested in having more stability, if you're interested in meditating better, I invite you to diminish these objects of distraction that actually do nothing other than stimulate the gupa, this mental agitation and excitement, because we live in a time where anxiety is so widespread and diffused. And if we look on a generational aspect, who 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 are more anxiety filled, the elderly, or the young people? Unfortunately, the young people today, because they are the ones who are more susceptible to this type of addiction. It's useless. It's useless to start pointing the finger at society, this and that. No, we need to look at ourselves. And it's interesting that these are all habits. And I realized just a short time ago, it's really interesting to see that we create habits. Or rather, it's difficult to change any habit, regardless of what it is. Even the ones that are harmful towards us. If we create a habit that is really bad for us, for example, the habit of complaining or the habit of being sad, it's a habit. The habit of anxiety, the habit of being stressed. I read something written by a doctor who wrote a book recently. I just read a part of it that said that stress actually is an addiction. That we are not victim of some system that stresses us. No, we've created addiction to stress. It's a habit that we have created, and changing a habit is difficult. So often one stays with a habit that's harmful instead of putting energy into changing it. So we can change a habit by stopping to nourish that habit. And we need also to create a habit on the other side that will counteract that harmful habit. So on one side, we need to diminish these objects of distraction. They are of our five senses. For example, the dynamic is always the same. I eat something really delicious. I eat something delicious that I really like. So my dopamine level is very high. The higher the dopamine level is, what happens when it ends? That fall is deeper. The deeper the fall, the stronger is that urge, that need, that urge to to get out of that feeling of void. So higher it is, the deeper it is. With food, I experienced this once that really taught me so much. It's a story I've told a couple times, but it's really emblematic of the situation. I was in the mountains, not very far from here, really beautiful. Um, and it was in the evening. I was really hungry after a long walk. It was a very, very small village, beautiful, and it was really hard to find a place to to it was hard to find a place to eat. There were many little restaurants, but they were all full. And then after a while, someone said, "Okay, there's one place, but dogs can't go in." And I said, "Okay." In the end, I got to the like last chance, the, the the last available restaurant, and the food was delicious. It was everything was delicious from beginning to end. It was really delicious. I had a wonderful meal. The problem was as soon as my meal finished, I started thinking, how can Ma- in Verbania, is there a place that where I can eat as well as this one? And inside, I started thinking, how can I repeat this experience of pleasure? And I even downloaded the Michelin guide. I could never imagine I would do something like that. I looked at it for 5 seconds and then I removed it from my phone. I saw that for days there was a part there was a part of my being that was um, there was a part of me that was taken by this need, by this urge to repeat that experience, and it took a part of me. That's addiction to dopamine. I mean, it's exactly this mechanism that happens. If we want to meditate well and diminish mental agitation, Buddha Amitabha says, you to have concentration, you need satisfaction. Satisfaction is a high level of serotonin. Satisfaction comes from giving, not from taking. Comes from giving value to what we have, not into getting more, to getting something else. So as long as we are in this loop of wanting to fill this void, the 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 more slave we are to this dynamic. And this is valid for all five senses. To sound, to taste, to smell beautiful things that we see, the aesthetic, seeing novelty, new things, touch, even sex. I mean, we end up in this loop of addiction. The more we are taken by all of this, the the greater our state of anxiety is, or the need to try to calm this anxiety or fill this void. And our mind is constantly looking around, trying to do this. So there I am sitting, trying to meditate. There's that emptiness is there somewhere. So our systems starts thinking, how can I fill the void? Oh, today there'll be lunch here, and we can go and do this. And you think of your objects of attraction here and there, and your mind just jumps from one to the next in continuously trying to fill that void. But what's interesting is that the real way to fill the void, the real way to obtain satisfaction is not by obtaining your objects of desire, but giving value to what we already have. Satisfaction is not the result about getting more, but it's about giving value to what we already have. And it's interesting because when we give to others, I can give to others because I have enough. Once I heard someone talk about the dynamics related to the different types of hormones, and they said that dopamine comes from obtaining. It's about me taking, obtaining, getting my pleasures or my senses, and serotonin is strongly connected to sharing and giving, and oxytocin with exchanging and connecting. So what we need most, we need serotonin and oxytocin. Oh, I mean, we need dopamine within these limits, but if you're too unbalanced, then it's a terrible downward spiral. So we need to take some serious actions. Otherwise, there's a great danger within a spiritual practice. One, at a certain point, goes on retreat, for example. In August, we'll have the Kurukule retreat, and also in these days now of self-healing. And one can go to the mountains, one can go far away to try to retreat. But first of all, why do we have this idea of retreat? What do we need to retreat from? From distractions. But if I live with a high level of addiction to dopamine and I try to really retreat, it becomes torturous, at least at the beginning. The worst is when I think that I'm on retreat because I'm closed in a room, I don't see anybody. I do my sessions, I recite the mantras I need to, I do what I'm supposed to do, but I'm there with my cell phone. As I'm doing the mantra, and there's my cell phone there on the table. I'm in that same process of addiction. I sincerely worry. I've seen people for whom I have a tremendous amount of esteem within the spiritual context to be in the middle of a session or self-empowerment, and they're there, and just in the moment of pause, a break, they're picking up their cell phone, looking at what? Nothing. You know, national sport of scrolling. It's worrisome. So we should allow ourselves to create healthy habits and diminish that. I'm just going to repeat one more time. If we want to meditate seriously or start, we need to eliminate distractions and eliminate this process of addiction to dopamine. Otherwise, we're just going to stay more and more with this strong sense of dissatisfaction, which is the opposite of concentration. It's impossible to have a good concentration if you are not satisfied. Now I'll go to what I wanted to talk about. Connected. Our habits are created by repeating. That's why in the sadhana, in the practice, what creates the habit is not reciting, but it's the inner state that we are creating, that we are generating. And there's something that's fundamental, which is the habit of being present in the present moment, allowing ourselves to be without looking outside, looking for something new. This is a habit that needs to be created. Another fundamental habit along the Vajrayana path is this habit of feeling joy, of feeling this inner state of enjoyment, of pleasure. How much worth is given to joy and to pleasure in general? So much, so much. Actually, sorry, sorry for the comparison somehow, but the, what's one of the greatest businesses of the world? Where does the world put energy? Where do they spend their money? What do they spend their money on? Pornography, sex. Why? Because we want to feel pleasure. One tries in every way. What are other things? Food. We want to feel pleasure, but actually there's something much, much better. There's an enormous difference between the level of enjoyment, well-being, the profound well-being and enjoyment that we can obtain compared if you compare the pleasure obtained from something external to the enjoyment and the pleasure that you can feel from what is generated within. They're completely different. The intensity, the length of time, the quality is so much greater if we create this from within. So we need to create, or trying to create the basis to be able to create ourselves within the joy, bliss, enjoyment. They use the term bliss. That is self-generated. That comes from within. I am bliss. Not that I do something that brings me pleasure. There's a huge difference between these two, and for many reasons, without now getting into details, it's one of the main differences between Sutra and Tantra is the vehicle, this tool of bliss, and knowing how to generate this inner state of enjoyment and bliss that naturally brings the consciousness to a deeper state. Just look, for example, when we feel a moment of enjoyment, of pleasure, where's our mind? Past, present, or future? As we're feeling pleasure. It's that present moment, right? If we're experiencing something pleasurable, even if I'm drinking something I like, eating something well, as I'm feeling that pleasure, I'm there. And sometimes I think that one of the most pleasurable things of pleasure is being present, because it's something that naturally brings us wellness. So this state of pleasure has this power to calm to calm down the cognitive, conceptual parts of our mind that looks to the past, that judges the present, that imagines the future. There was also a great Tibetan scholar of the previous century, Amdo Ginden Chupel, and in one of his books he talks about this. He says, one is so attracted to pleasure because finally the mind can rest. Finally we can rest and relax. We can stop that mechanism of looking back at the past, judging the present, and imagining the future. Finally, the mind can rest. I mean, there's nothing wrong with pleasures. When you're constantly looking for pleasures outside, you create that dopamine addiction, as we discussed before. When you can generate that feeling of pleasure through an inner process, you're not creating that same addiction. It's different mechanism. So it's important gradually we need to familiarize ourselves with satisfaction, with joy, with pleasure, with with inner pleasure, inner enjoyment, inner peace. We need to create the habit. And starting also from an assumption that this inner state of well-being and joy, it does not depend on external circumstances. It's a question. There are many types of pleasure, and in sports, I haven't thought about this, but so movement of our body or bringing our body, our physical body, there is a part, the endorphins, for example, that is good, but need to see if the endorphins also create that addiction, because maybe when you finish that physical activity and you've produced a lot of endorphins, and now once you've stopped and you need to repeat that to have that feeling again, that's similar to the serotonin. But in the practice of self-healing, at the very beginning, there's the purification of the elements, and in the sadhana of Yamataka or other sadhanas is called the transformation of the inner offering, where our main objective is to generate bliss, generate this inner state of enjoyment, of bliss, of pleasure. And I wanted to explain it now, but we'll explain it in the afternoon. It's important for us to understand if we want to do something seriously, we need to create the right conditions. I remember a friend who, unfortunately, who's already left his body. This is the monastery of Sera Geshe Nawan Tarpa. He was a boy that I met. He was quite young. He finished his studies. He became a Geshe. And he had an amazing intellect, and he was able to memorize. It was incredible. All the sadhanas, the long versions of every sadhana, all the philosophical texts. He knew everything by heart. He was number one in all the exams of memorization every year, year after year. It was crazy how much he knew. Any puja, any sadhana, philosophical books, he knew them from page one to the end. And it was incredible, but it worked against him because he became very good at being a chant master, an omse, because he knew all the texts by memory. And for many years, he said, I want to meditate well, I want to practice well, but now I can't because I need to do this and I need to do that. And so he would do his own prayers quickly, and he would do things without putting himself, without creating the conditions for the practice on a deeper level. After a few years, at a certain point, he had an opportunity to have more time, but he said, but he wasn't used to it anymore. He was always doing something, but instead of being by himself to face himself and practice, he just didn't have that. He didn't have that. He didn't have that habit anymore. And then when he did want to, when he wanted to start, he got actually sick. He had a tumor and he died. And it was clear. I mean, it's an example that's clear. If we don't try to create the conditions for the practice, for our practice right away, there won't be the day that that condition will appear, because we're made of habits, and are habits need to be created. They're little by little. So in breathing day after day with constancy, with the frequency. Now these days we're doing 4, 4, 8. We can get to 20, 20, 40, 20, but we need to start with 4. And it's only maintaining constancy day after day, little by little, and finding the joy, the pleasure in doing it. That's fundamental too. Just to conclude, it's very difficult to compete. It's very difficult to have the pleasure of practice at the beginning, to compare that to the dopamine and the pleasure that we receive from our cell phone. And these two things, the pleasure of the practice at the beginning can't compete with the dopamine we receive from the easy access to our cell phone. But if we want really to overcome this addiction, there will be this period of abstinence. I don't know if you've read recently, but there are many studies, many actions, groups that are against, for example, certain social media platforms that are detrimental to young people, but also to adults. But one thing is, if I want to just be, if I want to live my life as a silly person, or I want to survive having fun, or it's something else, if I want to live my life with more awareness, if I want to take the reins in my hands in a more serious way, that can really change, then it becomes very important to get out of certain addictions. At the end, I wanted to talk about this today because before we explain certain like deeper explanations in the practice of self-healing, for example, we need to be ready to create the right conditions. Otherwise, it's really difficult. I think it's quite clear. No? Now it's time for our dedications. And this afternoon, after the practice, we'll explain also the part of the purification of the elements.
Drove munsela tato ne gyur chi kewa kuntu yanda lama dang dralme cheki pela long ching sada lamgi yente rabzone dorje changi kopanyur tob Sho nimo dele tsendele nime kuyan delek shin Ninsen takto delek pe kuncho sumki chingi lob Kuncho sumki ngodrubut sol Kuncho sumki trashi shon
At dawn or at dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness.
At dawn or dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle all the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness. Oma hon tembala me sangye rinpoche, kyobala me tamche rinpoche, trimbala me gende rinpoche, kyamne kuncho sumla chepa bu. Lojo sambo pa gyo trashi pa tuche tempe trinle yar. Pegye drolo zambe zebra che pande lame shela chepa bu loma hon om ah.
Have a good lunch, and we'll come back at 4 o'clock.